It gives me great pleasure to have been invited to be part of this virtual rally, marking 29 years since the formation of South African Student Congress. Although we would have wished and preferred to celebrate this most significant milestone with a massive rally at a stadium somewhere, we have to contend with and adapt to the new normal of social distancing that has been imposed on us by COVID-19. To this end, I commend the leadership of SASCO for embracing the new ways of organizing political activity and refusing and not allowing COVID-19 to render the organization completely moribund. Notwithstanding the absence of thousands upon thousands of warm bodies that we are accustomed to at manifestations such as this that were meant to celebrate 29 years of existence, this virtual rally does provide us with the opportunity to reflect on the important place and role of SASCO, both in our society and in the mass democratic movement. SASCO is part of the progressive forces in our society pursuing the objectives of the National Democratic Revolution, consistent with its historic mission of being the intellectual hub for the mass democratic movement. SASCO asserts in its strategic perspective on transformation, SPOT as it is called, document, that we are members of the community before we are students. That is so correct. And I understand this to mean that SASCO seeks to produce thinking and highly conscientized members who are concerned about the challenges facing society in general and are in the end part of society and are also organic to the cause of the people. This was certainly the case when many of us were students. We saw ourselves being intricately linked with the concerns, the struggles, and the aspirations of society. The assertion in the SPOT document thus brings SASCO a step closer to being an organization of organic intellectuals. And yet, the overriding question that must be answered honestly is whether or not the rank and file membership of SASCO fully understand and appreciate the depth of the revolutionary content of such a simple sounding phrase. I suspect that it is on the basis of this very phrase that you as an organization have community work as one of the pillars of your day-to-day struggles. You were quite correct in this thinking and conceptualization because the history of the student movement in our country, particularly in the 60s and 70s, is littered and decorated with best examples of how a student organization can truly be committed both in theory and in practice to community work. Amongst those examples, SASO, the organization to which I belonged and which laid the foundation for the formation of SASCO, was very instrumental in the establishment of community health centers, advice offices, literacy classes, and other such areas of community development where students could volunteer their skills in service to our people. And this was done as a defiance of the oppressive system of apartheid. And at times, the student leaders and students who participated in these were often pursued, arrested, banned, and detained. Steve Biko, Bani Pichana, Eri Nengwekulu, and many others were part of this type of activism as a rejection of the apartheid system, but also to begin to imagine the future that our people longed for. And it was students who led this charge. It was students who demonstrated that they are indeed prepared, willing, and able to be of service to the people of our country. Were they persecuted? Yes. Were some of them even killed and murdered by the apartheid regime? Yes. And that is precisely the history that you have, and you stand on the shoulders of those giants. People who were prepared not only to focus on theory, but also to practice what they were articulating. The progressive student movement in this country has always seen and appreciated its role and duty beyond campus boundaries. It is for this reason that when the call was made during the decade of freedom to render South Africa ungovernable and apartheid unworkable, the student movement formed part of the broader progressive youth movement organized under the auspices of the South African Youth Congress, SAICO, whose 33rd anniversary we marked earlier this year. This united youth movement is what made the relaunch of the ANC Youth League relatively seamless following the unbanning of the liberation movement in 1990. The question SASCO must once again answer is whether or not there is any practical and coordinated work undertaken by the organization in community, amongst and with the people, consistent with the assertion of the spot document, which says, I quote, "We are members of the community before we are students," close quote. I'm asking these practical questions not with the intention of imposing an additional burden on SASCO, but because I believe that they are important in order for the student movement to know and fully appreciate its role in the advancement of the national democratic revolution. We've had outstanding leaders who have traversed this path before. And we are lucky that to this day we have a number of them who can continue to bear testimony to this aspect of work. People like Dr. Cyril Ramaphosa are still with us, Bani Tijana are still with us, Erinengwe Kuru, and many others. And hence the importance of this question. But I'm rather glad that it is a question that you have identified in your spot document. The ANC has determined that we are now in the second phase of our long-drawn transition from colonialism of a special type to the National Democratic Society. The tasks of the revolution during this decisive phase include educating and training a critical mass of ANC members ideologically, politically, academically, as well as morally. It is impossible to imagine that this can happen successfully without the active involvement of SASCO because of the organization's primary location in centers of knowledge, production, and consumption. The approach employed by SASCO in its relationship with the ANC is that it will complement the ANC where it agrees and contradicts where it disagrees, is encouraged. It is indicative of the political maturity of the student movement and the deep understanding of constructive criticism as one of the basic tenets of our organizational philosophy. It is, however, important to mention that contradicting the ANC on policy matters should not be the same as the headline and soundbite-driven populism of shouting down from rooftops everything the ANC does or says. Your responsibility as young revolutionary intellectuals must shape the future of this country, and in doing so you must engage very thoroughly the ANC on whatever matter through the various available platforms and channels. You must always remember that true to its nature as the real Congress of the people, the ANC is as much yours as it is ours who happen to lead it at this point in time. For the ANC to succeed in executing the tasks of the National Democratic Revolution, it needs an educated society with the necessary skills to build a sustainable and inclusive economy. Our universities and TVET colleges have an immeasurable role to play in this regard. We need young people who are conscious, whose level of consciousness is at a fairly high level, conscious of the tasks at hand, and who will participate both in the conceptualization and implementation of our program of fundamental socio-economic transformation. SASCO also has an immense role to play in the creation of a conscious and mobilized citizenry, upon which the success of the National Democratic Revolution is dependent. Now, we continue to create vehicles and platforms to make sure that we do indeed have a highly conscientized citizenry. And this is where a student movement plays a critical role. Conscientized in terms of political knowledge and understanding, and making sure that our people have a broad and world view of issues that affect their lives. But also conscientized and highly mobilized in the way of supporting government, working with government to achieve the ideals of the NDR. And a good example is recently we decided that we should have a government that functions seamlessly from national right down to local government. And that is why we decided on embarking on and setting up a district development model, where we will have one plan at the national level, one plan at the district level, one plan at the provincial level, and at the local level as well. But this also means that we need to have our people participating in an active manner in the affairs that affect their lives, in the affairs of the state, affairs of government, service delivery, improvement, and development. And it is this that a SASCO needs to play a role in getting our people to know that they have a role to play as active citizens. You have a responsibility to conscientize students, yes, and ensure that our universities are never turned into incubators of only a particular kind of thinkers who not only harbor anti-ANC sentiments, but also actively work to produce more and more who are opposed to the objectives of our revolution. You must pursue this mission relentlessly with a full understanding that our revolution is doomed to fail if we do not constantly and continuously and consistently win society over in the battle of ideas. And this is where, as highly conscientized students under the banner of our student movement, SASCO, play a key role. Beyond this, students have a responsibility to make use of all available opportunities and to pass all modules, the studies in pursuance of yet another objective of SASCO, which is academic excellence. Our revolution requires people who have a great deal of capability and excellence. We must never have career student leaders or university veterans who become gatekeepers, preventing others from accessing higher education. Despite the well-known difficulties associated with political activism, SASCO members must lead by example and excel in the classroom. It is your revolutionary duty to get your qualifications and place your skills at the disposal of your movement to better serve the people. The ANC relies on a strong and fighting and radical SASCO to ensure that its progressive policies in higher education are implemented fully and completely. We need a strong SASCO to ensure that bursaries which are meant for the poor actually go to the poor. We need a strong SASCO to ensure that residencies which are meant for students whose homes are far away from campuses truly serve their purpose. We need a strong SASCO to ensure that conditions at institutions of higher learning are improved and are conducive for academic excellence and success. In this regard, SASCO's success in doing all these things is inextricably linked to the ANC success in building an educated society based on the vision of the Freedom Charter, which was drafted by our forebears. SASCO must remain a united force truly in the hands of students. And in this regard, I wish all students well in their studies for the remainder of this academic year, especially given the challenges brought about by COVID-19. I also wish SASCO well in the SRC elections in all institutions where they will still be held this year. SASCO's leadership of the student movement is absolutely essential to ensure that national democratic revolution prospers and is attained. And this can be done by SASCO members who are united by an ethos of honor, also by an ethos of solidarity, but also remembering the legacy that you are meant to carry out based on what our forebears have bequeathed you. In the end, the true purpose of university experience, higher education experience that you are going through is not only about the accumulation of factual knowledge and skills, but the formation of ethical and intellectual character. Because according to this notion, we want the education that you are getting to produce a new kind of person dedicated to the enactment, to the achievement of social change that is clearly set out in our NDR. You have a huge task ahead of you because you are the inheritors of this country going forward. And we would say that as students, SASCO members, highly conscientized and highly educated, whatever you do, you must do with the understanding that your role does not